Yeah. So welcome Sallie, and welcome everyone here. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Eileen Spillane, and I'm the founder of Befriending Death, with the hope of normalizing conversations around death and dying. And I've been a nurse for many years, a former Zen hospice volunteer, a Buddhist practitioner and Dharma teacher, and life coach. And Sallie and I don't know if Sallie, you know this, but Sallie and I have some weird things in common other than meditation and Buddhism. But we also, in addition to nursing, we're both daughters of firefighters and both scuba divers. And we have a connection to NYU. I did my last clinical rotation at NYU in pediatrics and got my master's there. And you were a nurse at NYU, I believe, right? Oh, no?
No. I was a visiting writer there once.
Oh, visiting writer. Okay. So there's some NYU connection there. And so Sallie is a nurse and author of 10 books, including Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them. She's a registered nurse and has taught at Reed College and Northwestern University. And she's largely a self-taught writer on health and medical issues. And she's contributed to many different magazines: Tricycle, Harper's, Antioch Review, and The New Yorker. And she shares what's inspiring to her to write about death and dying and what she hopes for people to take away from her books. And so in addition to being a Soto Zen practitioner, a mom, and a grandma. And so we have Sallie for an hour. And then for those of us that want to hang on for the additional half hour, we can hang and chat. So welcome, Sallie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to adjust the biography just a little bit.
Go right ahead.
I am a nurse, but it's my job. It's how I pay the rent. My vocation is writing. I'm not a health and medical writer. I have written about health and medical topics, but I've also written about a lot of other things. And I'm a Zen teacher. I'm a transmitted Soto Zen teacher at Dharma Rain. So as I get older, my focus is very much on writing and Zen teaching, and less on working for a living. So and healthcare really is in a crisis in the country, has been in the crisis for several years, not just nursing and medical personnel, but every discipline in healthcare has been in crisis. So I'm still hanging on there, partly because it's hard to leave a crisis. So but also because I have to pay the rent. So I'm really here today. The thing about Advice for Future Corpses is that of all my books, it really brought together the four rivers of my life, which is healthcare, Buddhism, working with people who are in crisis, especially through Zen, and then family and friends. And I think the most important part of this is that the real expertise I brought to this book is that I've had dear people in my life die. I've been close to and experienced the kind of grief of losing an intimate one. And I think that's practice and expertise that each of us has to gain on our own, you know. But more than anything, every death we encounter is the first one. We can't really prepare for the death of someone we love, or, when your mother dies, it's the first time and the only time your mother ever dies. And there isn't really a way to practice that. But each death we encounter also will condition how we meet the next one. So if I have expertise, it's because I've lost my mother and my best friend and my teacher and other people who are close to me.
Yeah, and you speak to the beginner's mind, which for most of us that are Buddhist practitioners are very familiar with beginner's mind. And like you, I have learned so much from the professional side at the bedside. And there's something about when it's personal, it really
Yeah, all the professional experience goes out the window when it's someone you love dearly and don't want to let go. You just start from scratch every time.
Yeah. I'm coming upon a 2-year anniversary of my mom's death next month, and she was my greatest teacher even as a child, because she just normalized the conversations around death and dying. She never sheltered us from that, and we had a lot of open conversations around it, so that like you said, you can never really fully be prepared for it, but you can have those conversations, and you can be in dialogue, so that when that time does come, it's a little bit more familiar and you're ready for the conversation, and to be with what's present. And because we have Sallie just for the hour, please go ahead and put questions into the chat, or if you have a burning question, you can raise your hand and we'll go to it. But in the meantime, I'll just be having my own questions with Sallie, so I don't want to hog her.
And I have to warn you that in 1 minute, I have to turn the oven off.
Okay.
I have a meeting tonight that I didn't anticipate having to go to, but then discovered that I was expected to be at. So that's why I'm leaving a little bit early. So please ask me anything. Tell me whatever you need to say. I'm here to just be part of the group.
That's great. Thank you so much. And so, Sallie, you wrote this book in 2018, which was obviously
2015.
Oh, 2015. So way before COVID.
I think 2015. Yeah, it was certainly before COVID. Yeah. I
Yeah.
wrote 2 other books during the pandemic. I liked lockdown. That was fine with me. But no, I wrote this before that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a tool it's been for so many people. Are you surprised by the outpouring of success of this book?
Only in that it was a big deal in South Korea. I didn't expect, why South Korea? I don't know. But somehow it touched a nerve in South Korea. But no, I think that it's a topic that never loses its interest for us, is it? I mean, it's not something that we get used to entirely. And I gotta get that oven, but I'll be right back.
You go ahead and get the food. If any of you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat there.
It's a small apartment, doesn't take long. What was I saying? It never loses its interest for us, and then the older we get, the closer it comes, and the more we experience it. So I think it is kind of a perennial topic. It's also, a lot of what spurred me to write this book was admitting that for all my experience as a nurse, for all my years of Zen practice, I still felt denial. I still resisted. I think you're all going to die, but I'm not going to die. That there's still that sort of disbelief in the existential crisis of death, and really admitting that I still had this big no inside me, and that I still didn't entirely accept it. That's really what spurred me to start writing the book. Was I'm a certified end-of-life educator. How can I not believe what I'm saying? How can I learn to listen to my own lessons? So it was a way to really explore my own denial, as well as the truly strange, funny, weird, intimate experience of being with people when they are dying.
So now that you've written the book and you're immersed in this end-of-life education for other nurses, I imagine you feel like you've moved a little bit closer, and you moved the needle a little bit closer to accepting that you're going to die. Okay, just a tiny bit.
A little bit closer. I truly believe that we have all the time we need to be ready, and that time is very elastic, and that our brains are very elastic, and that even if I'm stepping off a curb and the truck is coming at me, somehow there is enough time to turn toward it. If you have practiced turning toward things, then, we practice presence, and we practice a kind of really rigorous self-examination, a really honest examination of our internal experience in order to be ready, in order to meet each moment completely. So every time I meet a moment well, I'm laying down a little bit of the groundwork for meeting that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that we have what we need. So I have some confidence there, but I am certainly not immune to an adrenaline reaction when I think about it. I'm certainly not immune to being an organism, to being a biological organism and the body does not want to die. The body wants to live and live, and so does the ego. So we somehow have to be friendly to our bodies and friendly to our egos and their needs, and still open to the fact that they will end.
Mm-hmm.
It's a paradox that is not quite solvable until we get there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people say they want to die in their sleep, but I'm like, no, I really want to meet this. I want to be awake and see it coming and meet it. I hope it's not a truck off the curb, but but I would like to. I think it's the last big adventure that we have, and I want to be able to meet it with curiosity and grace and willingness, and not be resistant. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, it's a
No
great.
one ever comes back to tell us. So
Well, there are some stories of like, oh, I saw the light and I wasn't done, and those kind of stories. Who knows? It's not like any of us here have the guidebook. We have the advice. We have your advice getting to that stage, but who knows what's going to happen when we actually do stop breathing and the heart stops. Oh, it looks like you're just muted all of a sudden.
that happened. Sorry. A lot of the advice in the book is for being with another person who is dying. What to expect, how to really be helpful, what not to say, what is useful to say, what to expect from the body, from another person's body as it changes. And some of the advice is for facing up to our own denial. But also it's advice about planning, because that denial and that resistance can make it very difficult for people to plan. I'm amazed how many I meet people who in their late 90s who don't have a funeral plan and don't want to talk about it. And if there's anything you can do for your family, loving gift to give your family, it's to make a plan for your death and for what to do with your body. I'm sure people in the room today have suddenly become the owners of somebody else's body that they had to make decisions about. And if you have no idea what the person wanted, it's very difficult. So it's really, truly a gift to your loved ones to tell them what you want. All the way from now until the end.
Yeah, and you just went through a whole list of things of like the body doesn't want us to die, and we don't want to die. The ego doesn't want us to die. The other thing that doesn't want us to die is our medical system, and our trained physicians, particularly when we have all the specialists, and the specialists come on and they're going to fix the kidney, or they're going to fix the heart, or they're going to fix the lungs, and we've lost the art of the gatekeeper, really, of looking at the big picture, as you said, of someone in their 90s who's has never contemplated their death. So what do you say to people who really want to advocate for their loved one, or they want to advocate for themselves in a situation where the physician just doesn't have the training to actually say, what are your wishes, rather than this is what we're going to do?
Right.
Your scan's not looking good here.
Well, I actually know I work in a good system with a good hospital and some really decent doctors. And I know that it's possible to have a system where people respect the patient and respect the family's wishes. And we always aim for goals of care conversations and advanced directives with every patient in our system. It's not true everywhere. I think number one with a bullet is the advance directive with a healthcare representative. And in the book, I quote a chaplain who says that your healthcare representative should be a real son of a bitch. And that's a hospital chaplain speaking, who has seen people not get what they wanted. So when you look for a healthcare representative, often our impulse is to choose our spouse or our adult child, and they're the last people that should be our representatives. They have a conflict of interest like nobody's business. It's the worst thing to ask of the person closest to you. Oh, sometimes they have to make decisions under tremendous pressure in very chaotic environments. Imagine an emergency room with a code going on, and the person who loves you more than anyone in the world has to say stop. It's just very, very difficult. So my two healthcare representatives are two close friends who know each other. And attached to my advance directive is a 2-page document describing my values about quality of life, what I would consider intolerable existence, what I would consider a good death. And they ask for me to do that, to write down values. So I've given them everything I can give them to let them be tough guys in the emergency room and still be willing to make hard decisions. And it spares my son, who would fall apart. It spares other people in my family from having to navigate this difficult system. So I think number one, you have somebody who speaks for you, and you have the papers notarized, and you update them, and you make sure a copy's with your doctor, and you just do everything you can to keep that visible. And if somebody resists the use of the advance directive, those people have to be very noisy, squeaky wheels. Even in a not good hospital system, that makes a difference. And then I know this sounds a little self-serving, but you get the nurses on your side. If you're struggling with a physician ever, you get the nurse on your side, because they know how to talk the talk. And often nurses are the ones that are really making significant decisions that will make a difference at the end. But I work in a hospital where even the intensivists in the ICU, they're very conscious of futile care, and they don't engage in it. And I think the hardest thing for us is when the family wants futile care, not the doctors. And there are families that cannot let go. And then we reach out to the chaplains, and we reach out to social workers, and we try to have those conversations. But I have rarely seen doctors unwilling, either if they don't want to make those decisions, they will hand off. Now, I work in a palliative care system, so the hospital is aware of what we're doing, so that helps. But I don't think we should generalize completely about that. Some doctors are very savvy about this, and they know they're going to die too. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Fred put a question in the chat here. Can a fiduciary be your healthcare representative?
Well, you need to literally appoint them as your healthcare representative. So they may also be a power of attorney for finances. They may also have another role, but make sure that it's clear they are your healthcare representative. That's what advance directives really are for. And I want to point out they're different from state to state. So find the one for your state and add as much to it as you want. They tend to be very blunt tools, very to have very little nuance. So I really encourage people to add as much detail as you want. So like my son is my power of attorney, but I would not ever ask him to be my healthcare representative. People have different skills.
Yeah. And Sallie, can you just share a little bit more about the 2 pages that you've added on to your advance directive and how specific you got in that?
I was quite specific. I talked about, for myself, the highest quality of life has to do with being able to engage with the world, with other people, with the world around me. So if I'm unable to engage, that feels like unbearable. It's not about being able to walk, but for somebody else, it may be. It may be I'm, being able to walk, being able to be outside. It may be being able to read. Everybody has a line, and it's a really good lesson to sit down and think, what is my line? What is my limit? I know most people, they think it's a lot harder than it is, that we can tolerate a great deal of change and we can adapt to a great many things. I'm really aware of that. But what I say is, if I'm unable to engage in any kind of relationship, then and if I'm never going to be able to return to a condition where I can have a relationship, then that's intolerable. Now, I work with a lot of people who have dementia and mental illness, and I do not consider that unbearable. I know a lot of really happy people with severe dementia. They're very much in relationship to the world. They're in relationship to the natural world, to their bodies, and to the people they meet. It's just very different from the way I relate. So I want to be open to all of those possibilities. Right now, my Zen Sangha is caring for one of our senior members who is dying of profound dementia. And he said when he saw the diagnosis was really coming forward, he asked that he remain visible to the community. He said, I want everyone to see this. I don't want us to pretend it's not happening. So he continued coming to meditation and to services until it became difficult. Until it was really intolerable for him. He didn't like it anymore. But his body memory of chanting and of sitting quietly is still there. It's interesting that he can't speak and he's incontinent and he's not really eating, but he can still keep a beat when we chant with him, because those are deep memories. Those are very deep memories. And he's still engaged when we're there. But the Buddha died in front of everybody in order to say, this happens to you too. This is what is coming. Look at this, see it clearly. And so when it was his turn, he wanted to do the same thing. Don't hide this. So I'm just very aware that dementia itself is not intolerable to me.
Yeah. And when what advice would you have for people who are in the early stages of dementia or some kind of cognitive decline? Because at some point they may not be of capacity to make a decision to appoint a healthcare proxy. So at what point, obviously
everybody should do it today.
But for those stragglers who procrastinate, and then they are meeting with a physician and they do have an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, what would be the consequences then if they hadn't made that decision to
so I have a client right now who his dementia is profound enough that he pretty much engages in the moment. He's aware of his immediate surroundings, and he's got pretty severe cataracts, and we know that the low vision is really making it harder for him to be engaged. But the ophthalmologist feels like he can't give consent. And I feel like he can, because when I say, would you like to be able to see better? He says, yes, see better. He knows I mean that he would have better vision. Can he give consent to surgery? It's an open question. So, we're working with the doctor, and what do we do about that? I'm not sure. In Canada, the assisted death law requires you to reconsent at the moment that you take the drugs or that the drugs are given. And there's been lawsuits by people with dementia in Canada saying, I want to consent now at such and such point that this be available to me. So I think it's still an open question around the world, what it means to give consent in dementia. But I also would really encourage people who are struggling with coming to terms with this diagnosis, to not have what we call the tragedy discourse. The tragedy discourse is that dementia is an unalloyed tragedy. Life with dementia is horrible. It's awful what happens to people. And that's not true. There's a lot of joy there. There's a lot of immediate presence, patience, an open heart, an ability to feel and express love. I know people who dance all day with dementia, and it's a much more nuanced and complex thing than the common culture has led us to believe. It isn't always a tragedy, any more than life is a tragedy. And what you lose with dementia is what we all lose with death. And some of us lose it in a day, and some of us lose it in a year, and some of us lose it in 5 or 10 years. But we're all going to lose the ability to recognize faces and swallow food and walk to the bathroom, and it's going to go away, all of it, everything.
Yeah, and you just referenced Canada's policy for aid in dying. You're in Oregon, correct?
The first state.
Yeah, way progressive state, leading the way for all the other states. And I believe it's like about 11 states that medical aid in dying in the United States is legal.
Yeah, 11 to 14, something like that. Oregon just changed its law this year to that you don't have to be a resident.
Yeah.
So people can come to Oregon for it now.
Yes.
There's still a lot of hoops that people have to go through. But it has been liberalized a little bit. I just last week, for another presentation I'm doing, looked up the current statistics. You know, there was so much prediction that aid in dying would be this slippery slope, and it would be misused, and it would be applied against the wrong people. But that's just completely not happened. Something like 1,700 people in 15 years have died, and about a third of the people that get the drug never use it. They just feel relieved to have it. It's almost entirely people over 60 with college degrees who are white. It's the most privileged people in our culture that have made use of this. And it's cancer, it's heart and lung disease, and it's Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. Those are the primary reasons people do this. And they have, I just feel like it's been a really important change. And I'm glad to see it spreading. So.
And what's your take, Sallie, on why marginalized communities are not, is it a lack of access to it, or is it?
I can only, I'm obviously in a privileged cohort, a well-educated white woman who speaks English as a first language and got vaccinated and has dentists. It's just like, there's so many layers of privilege that we forget. I've got a lot, but I know that from working with African-American families quite a bit here, there is a legitimate fear that they will not get equal care. It's a very legitimate history of unequal access to care. So some of it comes from just needing to educate, but it's also different values. Some cultures really value keeping a person at home and caring for them till their natural death. Some cultures devalue telling people that they are sick, and they want not to, we also have a Chinese immigrant community we work with, and they often resist telling the person their diagnosis. So we have to meet cultural values where they are as well. I just want aid in dying to be available. I don't want to promote it for everybody. Obviously, it's not right for most people, but I think it's an option that should be there. It's not suicide. Nobody who uses aid in dying wants to die. They just know that they have to. Mm-hmm. That's very different. So.
And being in Oregon, having had this in place for so many years, have you been with clients or patients who have utilized that? And what was that like? Could you share some of your experience around that?
I can't. I work for a Catholic organization.
Yes. So
I'm not going to talk about it. But yeah, and the one that most powerfully stays with me is the young man with ALS. a young, vigorous young man who had a very rapid onset of ALS and made it very clear this is not tolerable. So everybody's different. I can see there's a question in chat. Should we?
Yeah, I'll read it to you. You're kind of addressing it here a little bit. So Steve asked, do you see any possibilities of compassionate euthanasia, or whatever it's called, medical aid in dying, in the US, or in the way that it's being utilized in Switzerland, which is very different because that's euthanasia.
Yeah.
Let me just
the big difference in and this is true, I think, also in the Netherlands, is you don't have to be terminally ill. You just have to have intolerable suffering. So it has been available to people with chronic pain diagnoses that could live for decades. But they say, this is not a tolerable life, so let me go, let me leave. I think the most sticky part is when it's people who have psychiatric illnesses. And that's not, we haven't solved that one. We don't even know how to have a conversation about mental illness, let alone that conversation. But that's the big difference, is in the United States, you really absolutely must be terminally ill. And some people only get this in the last couple of weeks of they only get access to this in the last few weeks of their life. But in Europe, you can just say, I don't want to live anymore. My life is not tolerable. And that means people with dementia can express a desire. So
yeah, thank you. What, on this topic with end of life issues, what's your take on feeding tubes? And is that part of your 2-page addition to your advance directive?
Yeah, for me, no. Feeding tubes are appropriate for people with long-term chronic illnesses who are unable to swallow safely. That's what a feeding tube is for. It's not for keeping people alive who have stopped eating at the end of their life. And one of the main reason that dementia is a terminal illness is malnutrition. People become malnourished and their immune system fails, and they may die of an infection, or they simply die from lack of intake because people with dementia stop eating. And eventually they stop knowing how to swallow. They literally forget how to swallow. Their muscles stop working, and they don't know that mechanism anymore. So people lose weight, they stop eating and drinking. But also people who are just naturally dying from organ failure and from great old age also stop eating and drinking naturally. Even at 60, about half your taste buds are gone. And by 80, many people find it difficult to enjoy food because smell and taste has changed quite a bit. So forcing food on people, the trouble is, I have a whole chapter about this in the book, because we equate food with love. I certainly do. I'm a pretty healthy specimen here. Not eating seems very odd to me. But I know that it will happen. I know that will come. And it's one of the conversations I have with families, to not force people to eat or make them feel guilty if they're not eating or drinking. It's a natural change that happens. Sometimes it's called voluntary ceasing of food and fluids, but I don't really think of it as voluntary so much as a natural change that happens to the dying body. And it's very much part of dementia. I mean, a person with dementia, eventually they forget how to walk, they forget how to speak, and they do forget how to swallow. So pushing back against that is just cruel. A feeding tube, they're painful. They require continual maintenance. They send people to the ER regularly. They are surgically inserted. And they require this constant maintenance. And if you don't even know why it's there, all it is doing is prolonging. And I feel the same way with oxygen. Supplemental
Heard
oxygen.
about that. Yeah.
If a person is legitimately dying, why do we put them on oxygen? It's not going to fix it. It's
Mm.
not going to cure it. I'm being very blunt with you guys. At the bedside, I would be a lot more diplomatic. And one of the things at the bedside that is my job is to really be the witness for normal dying, to be able to go in and say, what I see is a person who is comfortable. I see someone who is resting. I don't see signs of pain. I don't see signs of discomfort. And to really normalize that this is just going the way it goes, that I've seen this before, that this is how people die, this is what it looks like. It's not something that we try to fix or cure.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on that. Well, first of all, I just turned 55 2 days ago. So now I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to get that food before these taste buds stop working. So that's a little fun fact. I didn't know that, Sallie. So thanks for sharing.
I just did an education for our assistants about the changing sensorium of age, which is, how vision and hearing and everything changes. And, everything changes. But I had them eat salt-free crackers without any water to drink. And their eyes kind of lit up like, oh, is this what food tastes like? Is this why? One of them just said, that's why they don't want to eat. Suddenly they just kind of got it, that you can't smell anything, so you can't taste anything. So that's why as we get older, we want more sugar. We want to put more salt on things.
Yeah.
It's all part of adaptation.
I recall all those days in the ICU when, patients are on a breathing machine, on a ventilator, and the families, because food is love, the family's like, well, what they need to eat. I brought food from home. They need to eat. And so, yeah, your conversation about just normalizing that this is actually at the end of life, it's not necessarily needed for the body in a way. It's like sort of a natural option. And VSED, which we touch on in our course, Let's Chat About Death, is voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And, you're sort of addressing that there. Can you speak a little bit to dying in the presence of loved ones versus dying alone, and how sometimes you'll have a family sitting vigil 24 hours, but then they go to the cafeteria and then they die?
So we have a program for our community called Hand in Hand, which is about being training people to be good bedside companions for members who are dying. And part of what we talk about there is the balance between solitude and companionship. And a good companion always allows for solitude. There is a program you've probably heard of called No One Dies Alone. And it's about volunteers sitting at the bedside of people who have no family and no loved one, who may be estranged or just isolated, and they have nobody to be with them. And I think, that's lovely. Go read a book, go sit quietly, but then leave the room for a while, because it's not that no one dies alone. It's that some people will only die alone. Literally, they won't die unless and I think, well, my gosh, what is more private? You really have to give people both. And so, yeah, sometimes I have to talk to families about, let's step out in the hall and have a conversation, which is my way partly of giving the person some privacy, which may be the time that they need. Well, for my mother, I'll tell a story that's in the book. My father, she was in a very nice little small town hospital, the hospital where I was born, actually, and where all of her kids were born. And she was alone, had private room, but my father would not leave her bedside, and he just kept talking to her, saying she was unconscious, and he kept saying, don't go, please don't go. We still have to paint the bedroom. We still have to do this vacation. Please don't leave. My sister-in-law was also a nurse, and we just kind of looked at each other and said, Dad, you need to leave so that we can change her. And we finally managed to get him out of the room, and she died within like a minute and a half of him leaving her bedside. And I know she'd just been waiting somehow. And whatever the mystery is, there's a lot of wonder and mystery at this time, but somehow she knew that she could go then, and we could go tell him. I've seen it happen over and over and over, that the 1 5-minute period when people leave the room is the time when the person dies. So, yeah, so both, provide some non-judgmental, loving companionship that is not a bunch of people chattering about their next vacation, but is actually, sort of present and attentive, and then some quiet.
Yeah, and in your book, you speak a little bit about how to be the gatekeeper for them. So it kind of goes back to like, you need a tough son of a bitch. Is that how you describe your healthcare practice? You sort of need that kind of attitude for the gatekeeper in managing, and we need some periods of rest, and maybe this isn't the visitor because this person's talking about whatever they're talking about.
Right. I said everybody needs an advance directive, but I think it's very useful to also just have a dying plan. I have one. We have a form we use at our community, and encourage everybody to fill out a dying plan that says, who do you want there? What rites and rituals do you want done? But it includes who should not be there. Who would you rather not have at your bedside? It might be an aunt or a sibling or a friend who is dramatic or negative, or you may love them, but they're not going to have the energy you want. So it's okay. You get to do this once, and it's not the time to try to protect other people's feelings. It's the time to put yourself first and say, this is what I need and what I want, and let the gatekeeper be the diplomat. To just say, not receiving at the moment, this is not a good time. The other thing that's part of this is that you say goodbye one time. You come to say your goodbyes, you say your goodbyes, and you don't come back the next day and say your goodbyes again. And I've seen that happen over and over. They're still alive, so I've got to do it again. You just say goodbye once, and you don't beg for forgiveness or rehash old arguments. Some of the work that needs to be done is just your work to do. It's not the time to fix everything that happened in a life. Really respecting a dying person means not putting your business forward, if that makes some sense. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what would you say, is there a role for forgiveness? Is that not necessary?
That's a very individual thing. Forgiveness is one of those words that has such connotations for everybody. It's going to reverberate culturally and familially for a lot of people. In strict Zen Buddhist terms, forgiveness means that that your health and happiness and peace is dependent on somebody else. And I don't want that to be true. I want to find my equanimity and my peace without it depending on someone else. Does that make sense? But this is very individual. I'm not prescribing that at all. A person who is dying may need to give forgiveness to somebody, and they may need to ask for forgiveness. What I'm talking about is when the visitor shows up and says, please forgive me, because that's usually not appropriate.
Yeah, they're already dying. They don't need the added burden of like, okay, now I've got to pause my dying to forgive or accept forgiveness.
The legal federal definition for the federal government of a good death, and we have to have one because of because we reimburse hospice services and so on. You've probably seen this definition. Talks about how patients, families, and caregivers all feel that their needs have been met, and that everything is going the way they want it to. And it really bothers me that patients, families, and caregivers are put at the same level, because it's rare that a whole family agrees about how a person should die. It's rare that there's not some conflict with a caregiver at some point, or a conflict between the patient and the family, or the patient and the caregiver. So to me, it's always got to be that the patient is up here, and the family and caregivers, if they're uncomfortable, we'll work with that, but it's the patient's choices that have to be paramount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about aging at home? Like I had both parents, one died in the hospital, one died at home, but they lived at home pretty close to the end of their life, because they lived in a multi-generational home, and because someone was retired early and could take care of them. And we've got a sandwich generation who's got kids they're taking care of, and aging parents, and they still have to work and, still take care of themselves. Like how do we set them up for success for
Right.
somebody who wants to age at home?
Our culture does not support this. Our economy does not support this. Everybody says they want to die at home, but that might mean a third floor apartment where you live alone, and the doors are not big enough for wheelchairs, and there's no privacy for a commode when you can't get into the bathroom. I mean, dying at home is a lot more complicated and can be a lot messier than people realize. So the first question is who's going to be there at 3 a.m. when you have diarrhea? Can the equipment fit? I mean, really just very practical questions. But there are also lots of good systems out there that can be made use of. I work for a PACE program. PACE is a national set of programs for palliative care that support, they're all about keeping people in the community and out of institutions. But community may mean a foster home. It may mean assisted living with caregivers who come in. It may mean a sibling's home, but caregivers helping. It's going to look like a lot of different things. But I think we have this little romantic idea that, oh, I'm just going to die in my bed. But not if you're incontinent and you don't have anybody there in the middle of the night, and you can't figure out how to take your own medicine, and it's just, dying is not actually very neat. It's kind of messy. And even though we can predict a lot, the day-to-day can be pretty unpredictable. So put down on your advance directive that your preference is to die at home, and then open your hands. And I like the idea that there's an ethicist said this, and I can't remember it. Daniel Callahan said this, that the most important aspect of dying is not control or choice. It's mastering the fact that you don't have a choice. It's being master of expressing your wishes and then letting go. Constantly letting go of the fact that you're not going to be in charge. So I have all these plans. I have all my paperwork. I have all the legal stuff. Everything's done. But I still know that it may not turn out the way I think it will at all. It may look completely differently. It might happen on a bus in Nebraska. I don't know, so that open-handedness, that's part of that grace that I want to cultivate, that if I can just be curious about it, if I can just lean in to whatever's next, then I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, and those of us that are control freaks are not going to be so okay.
I know. Hey, alpha over here, a little big alpha dog. Yeah, you have to really cultivate the ability to let go of being in charge, which is something I've been trying to do my whole life, because I know best. It's tricky, but I love that idea that we are masters of letting go of control. There is a way to master that.
Yeah.
It's just meeting the moment. It's just meeting what's in front of you completely.
Well, we've got 7 minutes of Sallie left. So who's got a question? Because I mean, I can keep talking and Sallie can keep talking, but is there anybody that wants to raise a hand here or put a question in the chat?
It's okay if you don't.
Yeah, it's totally okay if you don't. Well, I have another question for you.
Oh, I see one hand there.
Oh, who's raising their hand?
I
Yeah, go ahead.
I just I was touched, Sallie, by at the part of the book when you talked about how you had seen so many bodies, had dealt with death so many times, but it was when you saw your mom embalmed,
Oh,
really, really took you back. And our mother passed away, and she said that she wanted to be embalmed and she wanted an open casket kind of funeral situation where we had to stand beside the casket and greet people for visitation. It was horrifying for me. I don't know about my sister here, but it was horrifying. And then my father was much more kind about it, and he said, only if you want to see my body. And it turned out my daughter did, so we went in to see it, which I didn't want to, but I'd like to hear you say something about that, because I really wish I had not had that experience.
yeah.
Because
I wish to. I was with my mother when she died. I had my hands on my mother when she died of metastatic cancer. And 2 days later, she looked 20 years younger and healthy and like she was about to wake up. And it was genuinely freaked me out. It was so spooky. I was pretty young when my mom died, and I just remember like sort of jumping back, like I was, and I think people who, since so few of us get to see a person after they've died, I think it interferes with grieving. I think it really genuinely confuses people as to whether this person, they look healthy, why are they dead? If you can be with a person over the course of their illness, then we really clearly see it coming. We know what's happened. And if you look at human history, being with the dying and caring for their bodies is almost a universal ritual. And it's a highly desired ritual. It's something that is done as an honor, as a reverence. And then and to have that taken away from us, I think it's really a shame. So I always offer to families, I'll help you bathe the body. It's kind of like a shocking idea for a lot of people, but that's what humans, billions of humans have done for thousands and thousands of years. So I think there's something really precious there. Yeah. And, you know, a good friend of mine is a natural burial funeral director. She's a licensed mortician, but she won't embalm people. So one thing she won't do, because it's also poisonous. It's a terrible thing to put in the earth, and it's very violent. If you've ever seen it, you don't want to have seen it done. It's violent. So I'm really glad to see that practice is gradually disappearing from American culture. Yeah. But you were really stuck because it was what your mom wanted.
yeah, and I appreciate you bringing this forward, because it's been great, because in doing this work that I've been doing and studying this work, we've been having wonderful conversations, and it's just changing our culture, our way of thinking, and I so appreciate it. So thank you for that. And just when you said that, it normalized my feeling around my mother, and that has always, it was a little traumatizing.
Yeah.
I saw her right before she died, and then I saw her embalmed, and it was not my mother.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't even look good to me. It was like, who is that? I don't even know who that is.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy.
I think there's one more comment and then I have to go.
Yes, we'll make this your last one. So this is from Wolf Whisperer. Over the last few years, are you seeing changes in the system, or is the system really the same with some outliers like Oregon? So maybe speaking to the death positive movement and what you're seeing.
Well, there's the death positive movement, which, you know, it's kind of like remedial education for people, but also the natural burial movement, I think, is very exciting. It's just, both of those are just taking us back to where we used to be. It's taking us back to a more natural human history. However, I don't think we've seen by any means the end of what the pandemic is bringing to us, which has framed unequal access of care. It's framed the crisis in healthcare staffing. It's framed supply chain issues for medications. And then we have this massive movement of disinformation. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of that yet. Also, the demographics of our country are changing fast. And so we all need to work on being culturally competent to understand all the different rivers of belief and religious and philosophical belief that's coming into our systems. They're not nimble. Our systems are really not nimble. But I can't emphasize enough how much it is a crisis across the country, the lack of staffing and we are really coming up against a crisis point for American healthcare. So I don't think we've seen the end of it by any means. But I do encourage people to look into the natural burial movement, human composting, aqua cremation, all of the much more environmentally friendly ways to dispose of a body. Because I meant what I said at the beginning. It's the kindest thing you can do for your family. Tell them what you want done with your body.
Yeah, and Sallie, are you familiar with Dr. Tony Bach out of UW, who he did an amazing research study giving healthcare workers who were frontline workers in COVID who had PTSD, giving them psilocybin in a research study.
Oh, I'm interested in all the psilocybin research. I think, that's another thing we used to know, that human history has plenty of understanding about natural medicines that we've lost. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna have to go because I have to get to another meeting that
Oh my goodness. I'm so grateful for you to give us your time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. You were so quiet. I hope that this was helpful and good for people. So see you on the other side, maybe. We don't know.
Let's pray on the other side.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.